Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is DebateSensei IPDA edition, where we talk about things relevant to the International Public Debate Association, competitive debate at the college level. I have with me our Chief Banter Officer, Tim Seavey. Thank you so much.
That's me.
Yeah.
Providing color commentary.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about as it relates to IPDA this week?
All right, so we got our series inside of a series, right, where we're doing a deep dive on a single issue that we think is a likely topic of debate in tournaments. This one is going to be campaign finance reform. We are deep in the throes of the presidential campaign. And so things like, campaign finance reform is definitely up for grabs when it comes to a potential topic of debate.
Yeah, I think if seeing this in an IPDA strike, I would do everything I could not to strike this topic, because I feel like on either the affirmative or the negative, there's just so much meat to dig into.
Yeah.
That I think it would make for a fun round, and it's worthwhile to get into. And I think everyone becomes like a little bit of an expert in it every time there's another election cycle. So it's like worthwhile if like judges care about that kind of thing too.
Yeah, and it is one of those things that I think that having an understanding about like decisions and laws and history behind it is it's tricky. It's tricky. You definitely need to have that, because the rules that are associated with campaign finance, like what's constitutional and what they ruled was unconstitutional, I think is one of the things that the Supreme Court deals with a lot, and they propose lots of legislation around it. And so I don't know, it becomes a little difficult. It is definitely sort of a dense legal debate, in my opinion.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think the big important background things to know, I would say, is the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, is in charge of upholding campaign finance rules, which are essentially making sure that individuals are not donating more than their amount that they're allowed to donate. So there are limitations that have been reformed over time and are adjusted for inflation each year and whatever. But individuals can only donate so much to candidates, so much to committees, so much to larger groups or to causes, or like Senate committees and things. So keeping those things in check, though, becomes a real problem. So as I was reading up, one of the core issues is that the Federal Election Commission always has 6 commissioners and is never allowed to have more than 3 from the same party. So the idea being that in order to have a majority, in their in charge of stopping candidates or groups that are going outside of the rules, so there has to be bipartisan agreement in order for punishment to happen. But the problem is that doesn't happen. It just becomes well, our guy did it. Well, we think he was bad. Well, no, he didn't do it. And that's just really the bipartisanship with which it was created, or the intent was behind it, has not really come to pass. So apparently there's a lot of rule skirting that happens there. But then the other really, really big piece of background is what really comes down from Citizens United. So that was a Supreme Court case wherein it was decided that organizations, so corporations and labor groups, can make unlimited donations to super PACs. Yes. So it's not to individual candidates, it's to super PACs, which have very, very little regulation about what they're allowed to spend that money on. But because of that has dramatically 3x the amount of campaign spending that's happened in the last couple of elections. Yeah,
and that was in part struck down what was known as the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. That's the McCain-Feingold Act. And so it struck down union. What am I seeing here? Union and corporate spending on it. So it's what really gave rise to super PACs, right? So now all you have to do is, in order to develop a super PAC, is promise that you are not coordinating with the candidates when you are doing your electioneering. And as long as you promise that you're not coordinating with them, then you can spend unlimited amounts of money. And that money cannot be traced in some cases, right? Because sometimes there's shell corporations that make these donations, these corporations that are created specifically just to make donations to campaigns. And therefore now it's untraceable, because those are private corporations. You don't know where the money came from other than this shell corporation.
And they're treated as private citizens because that's what came out of Citizens United, is that corporations are people too.
Yeah.
The joke that came from it. But it really does dramatically change the landscape of just how much money can flow into it. So where a lot of my curiosity also came from is, at least at this moment in time, I'm just getting absolutely bludgeoned by political texts and emails
Yes.
nonstop all the time, and everybody is. It seems like that is just a nationwide phenomenon. And yet we also see headlines of like Kamala Harris just crossed $1 billion in funds raised. Like
right.
in 80 days as a candidate, she raised $1 billion. And yet we're all still getting texts for like, please donate anything you can, like, please pleads to donate money. So it raised the question for me, like, where the hell is this money going, right? Like, this is important, helpful, like background knowledge to know going into a debate round, so you can kind of craft cases or know like disads or be able to say like, this is, why something is good, bad, or otherwise. And apparently, I mean, a lot of it is still going into, advertising, as you would expect. So buying airtime, buying social media ads, buying, mailer campaigns, every other kind of, marketing basically that you can imagine is where a ton of this money goes. So they've spent something like $400 million so far on the candidates together on their campaigns. Yet they're still outpacing in fundraising by like a huge margin. Like the goal is certainly not to like spend down to zero. So by like election day, the coffers are empty. It's what they can do with the money after the election happens that I didn't know about that gets, real hairy. They can make donations to charities, neat, but they can also make donations to super PACs, other like political action committees. They can make donations to other candidates. They can donate it to their party. So the DNC or the RNC can just like gobble up that excess cash. Like that's wild, and kind of makes sense from an incentive perspective why it's like raise as much as you possibly can. It's not even necessarily to win. It's just like for the campaign and the party at large.
I'll admit that I feel like I'm kind of struggling to understand sometimes, because Kamala Harris is able to raise $1 billion. There's still limits on contributions, or they're supposed to be, right? Like individual contributions. But I guess that like there's so many different ways that people can contribute that, I guess it's the super PACs but you should be able to donate to a super PAC, and it's not coordinated. That shouldn't be counted in like Kamala Harris's grand total, right? That's not counting super PACs. So I'm wondering, like, man, if there's limits on contributions, how are they able to constantly just, increase the amount that they're able to collect every freaking election cycle? So I'm a little...
And it's by like huge margins. So it's like the number of small dollar donations. So that's like, there was like a really big chasing point, right? Like Trump got a lot of credit for in the first cycle in 2016 for not taking super PAC money, or at least he said they didn't take super PAC money, and the majority of donations were these small dollar donations. And so it made it seem like this like grassroots thing. And so that's now a leading point that a lot of politicians will try and push, like, the majority of our donations are small dollar. Like, yeah, the majority by number. I don't know that necessarily like by dollar. But still, so small dollar donations I know contribute like a large portion to that. And I think the like increase in text message campaigns, just all the stuff that gets into our brains and into our inboxes seems to work. So it seems to be like fairly effective. So they're just coming up with more, interesting, crafty methods. Okay. What's crazy, like amazing to me though, is that it doesn't seem to like there has always been this, pretty good correlation between how much money a candidate has and how they perform. But there really is not, at least at this point in time, like a strong correlation between like money raised and polling, like how, candidates perform. Yet they try and make it seem that way. Like, oh, so-and-so is pulling ahead in the polls, donate now to overtake, is like how they're creating this like horse race mentality with donation. So as debate topics, I think it's an easy thing to come out there with a thesis, something to the effect of, it is an absolutely corrupt, broken money glut system. The ways that like billions of dollars are raised and spent on these things is broken, and like that's not how that should be. It's not a worthwhile use of dollars, right? So instead, how do we go about changing it? So like when the subject of finance reform comes up, the first one that I really like just thinking about is, what would it look like if there were actual limits? So if there were limits to not like how much can be donated, because I feel like those are so easily skirted with super PACs or what do they call them, packing or stacking? I guess like two different ways that like you can take a bunch of maxed out individual donations and then bundle them together, and now it's something different. So there's just so many like ways to skirt the rules. I don't think you'll ever stop it that way. But if instead there were a limit on spending, that I think is an interesting avenue where like if a candidate cannot spend over a certain amount, then like their donations up to that, I imagine like it would seem would just be very transparently purely donations to the party or donations to like the national committee. So if instead, we said a campaign cannot spend more than $10 million or something, like you can set the bar, as low as you want, but say like that is the now, war chest for all advertisements, for all junkets, for all, conferences, for all fundraisers, like whatever events and things they're throwing, that's the absolute max. What would that do to a campaign? Like both candidates would certainly max it out very, very quickly. And then what? Like, so it's not about just fundraising anymore. What is it? How would a campaign look different?
Yeah, like I think if I was going to kind of categorize the different approaches that an affirmative could take, would be either reforming the FEC, reforming donations, and reforming spending, like capping donations or capping spending as approaches. And there's problems with all those. I think the FEC might be the easiest. In my mind, the FEC might be the easiest one to avoid all the legal problems, because the Supreme Court has pretty consistently over the last 10 20 years been striking down caps on donations and on spending. And so like any sort of affirmative that caps any sort of donations or spending, like you almost guarantee that it's going to get struck down in the Supreme Court. I don't know about you, but like those sort of unconstitutional disadvantages, they're usually solvency takeouts, right? Where it's just, like you might be able to pass this law, but it won't survive any sort of challenge whatsoever. So you have to, I don't know, I don't know how to get around that. But those are my main ones. And I like the FEC reform about like, let's stop having a system that is designed for deadlock. It might be a good, like, I kind of like that one,
So I don't know how you would go about doing it, because like it's an interesting avenue, right? But like, so I mean, even if you said that we have a third party, an outside group or something that is in charge of enforcing policy. So take the power out of the 6 commissioners' hands and put it into a new, body, make it an odd number, whatever. The decoupling of political motivation from whatever that organization is the challenging part. It's like the Supreme Court is not supposed to be a partisan body, and yet it absolutely is, right? Like you end up with party lines votes all the damn time. So some of that I think is maybe just like we like to categorize things as people, and so we just kind of force like, well, obviously they're this party because of look at their decisions. But I think it's very hard to divorce those two things. So, I mean, how might you decouple those and like try and make it a nonpartisan commissioner?
I don't know. Let's see what ChatGPT says. I'm putting in
nice.
Suggest a reform to the FEC. All right. What is it saying? One potential reform to the FEC could be to restructure the composition. Yep. Restructuring, reduce the number of commissioners from 6 to 5, just making an odd number. Like that. I mean, like, but you're still going to have a political fight, but at least you'll have more. At least they'll be able to come to conclusions. They won't be deadlocked.
It feels likely, though, that whichever party is overrepresented is going to be the one enforcing it on the other. Like that feels out the gate one-sided. Like no matter, then it's just however the commission is composed, decisions will be made in that party's favor, so long as it's still a partisan group.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know, but I mean, that's the point of debate, right? It's kind of like, all right, like, can you really say that that's worse than how it is now? Like, like you have to come up with some sort of reason why that's a disadvantage, and that's like, well, you just get faced with the try or die response, right? It's like,
that's fair.
We got to do something. We got to do something because like literally nothing is happening right now. Whenever there's a problem, all they have to do is stick to their guns, and that's it. And so at least now there can be some decisions that are rendered because it is an odd number of people. I don't know.
Maybe like it's possible to even like lower the bar for certain penalties, or like I'm not sure exactly what punishments the FEC can dole out. But if, for example, they're able to, cite fines or something like that, you can just make it like so long as 2 commissioners think that it's a problem, right? So the like punitive arm of the FEC can now be enforced. Like they can basically dole out penalties however they so choose, but like removing candidates or like more significant things require a majority. So you could just no longer require a majority for certain punitive actions, and just like basically increase the autonomy of each commissioner to like, all right, go do your job. If you see malfeasance, go crack down on it. And you don't have to have a majority opinion in order to do that.
Yeah. Another option is term limits. Like apparently right now it's like if the Senate refuses to confirm new commissioners, the people that are there can stay there indefinitely.
And
so like maybe some term limits, and so it kind of forces like at least some sort of turnover, and like you have like different thinking that's happening. It suggests like a 6-year term limit, and that would kind of it helped to limit the amount of power that the president has, because the president has a 4-year term, and so a 6-year term might make it so you have these rotating. It just kind of more turnover.
Okay, that's fair. So other things. So besides like where I think limitations on spending, I think like limitations on rollover would be where there's other interesting avenues. Like I like the limitations of the FEC, or like reforming the FEC, but the thing that I've just learned about of like when they fundraise more than they spend in their campaign cycle, what they can do with that money, like creating slush funds, donating it back to super PACs, to their to their national conventions, etc. Like that feels like that's a pretty like glaring like smoking gun of corruption. Like so long like you can't keep it, so they at least go so far as to say that the candidates cannot use it for their own personal uses, right? Like that's like one firm rule they have. I feel like that could also just be extended to what else they're allowed to do with it. Like if they made it so currently like you can make donations to charities. And granted, not all 501c3 charities are created equal. Like there are some that definitely don't do charitable things. They're just tax shelters. But still, like that's maybe an avenue that you can say like, all right, no more donations back to politics. Like let's end this cycle of over fundraising. And instead it all has to be donated or spent.
Okay. Yeah. Like that's where you start getting it. And then we're still running headlong into what will the Supreme Court do? Because it's like inherently a First Amendment issue. At least that's how it's always framed. Right. And because money is considered speech and corporations are considered people, like it becomes, it becomes really, really freaking hard to, impose any sort of restrictions on this, even though everybody agrees that money is corrupting the entire system. Like everyone pretty much acknowledges like, yeah, that's horrible. That's horrible. That's horrible. But at the same time, they say free speech is great. So there seems to be a disconnect between the Supreme Court and the general population, where people don't, it seems like implicitly people don't consider just like mountains and mountains of money to be the same thing as speech.
So another interesting one, what like if there were a tax levied on political speech? Nah, I guess that wouldn't work either. I'm just trying to think like out of the box. So one thing that I think probably can come up as a disadvantage. So if you're on the negative side and like or honestly even just as part of your harm story, the cost of advertising goes up dramatically during political season.
Oh, really? Huh.
So like some folks that I know that are in the marketing world that like they run paid advertising with their clients around election cycles, they just tell their clients to throttle down or completely cut off their ads because the cost of just getting in someone's newsfeed goes up so dramatically. It's like wild. It breaks like every other industry. So where you're normally getting, your ads for this TV show and this cosmetic and this, car or whatever, those ads, that single, slot of space goes up in cost so much just because of supply and demand. Like there are only so many ads that can be stuffed down our throats. And so media companies just continue to jack up the costs. And that's where campaigns just continue to fundraise because they'll keep paying these, inflated costs. So it's like this kind of runaway cycle where the only real winners are like the media companies and I suppose like the political action committees that get to keep the money afterwards or do whatever the hell they choose to do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
like how to disincentivize or like break those things up. So I guess it's like the collective of free speech in the form of money is where you seem to start seeing like the most obvious examples of, corruption of the system. So I think you've got a good disadvantage to say like, here are the areas that suffer. The whole economy's marketing gets worse or like advertising becomes less effective, more expensive, harder to do during this period of time.
This conversation is giving me more and more sort of motivation to frame a debate around campaign finance in maybe more like philosophical terms rather than policy terms. Like, I think maybe we've gone so far down the path of, the Supreme Court has taken us so far down this one path that the only way that we can do this is by rethinking things, right? And actually having a discussion about some of the fundamental assumptions. And one of them that I have thought about a lot was the equivalence of money and speech. And I think a debate round would be a great place to interrogate that, considering it's a speech event. You know what I mean? It's like kind of like that is like that's our home. Is like we are talking about what speech is, and so start drawing distinctions between money and speech in order to explain why they are not the same thing. And so, like that sort of thought process takes it outside of the policy realm. It's like, so, of course, Supreme Court's not going to agree with this. Of course, nobody's going to vote on it or anything like that. But we really need to have this discussion, right? Where like, what is it about speech that makes money not speech? Like, what are some intrinsic qualities of these two things that make them separate and not that you can't overlap them? Because like one thing I was thinking about was how the whole purpose behind speech or like freedom of speech was that the best ideas were supposed to rise to the top based on the message, right? Whereas money doesn't have a message, right? It in and of itself, it's just a number. It could pay for any message. Like, $100 in my pocket can pay for a message that goes one direction, but $100 in your pocket could pay for that same $100 can pay for a message in the opposite direction. So the money doesn't speak for itself, right? It's whereas the message, like in freedom of speech, the message is the message. You know what I mean? It's like, or like the person saying it is also influencing the message, but like money kind of strips all of that away. You know what I mean? It's like there's no speaker, there's no message, there's just a number, and then once it actually gets used for something, that's when the message occurs. I don't know, something to me that just strikes me as that's not the same thing as speech.
Yeah, so there's a particular type of donation that was addressed in McCain-Feingold on is like packing. So the idea was at the time, like a common thing you'd see in the news is like very, very wealthy families would, because there's limitations on how much an individual can donate, they would give that same donation maximum amount as checks to like every single member of their extended family, and then use that. So like their 5-year-old niece is donating their maximum allowable to a particular candidate. So they'd write these checks to all of these family members and then basically immediately rewrite checks from those family members to the campaign and then stack all of these checks together. Now, a family is not a good example because that really can only go so far. But when they would get larger organizations, larger groups of people together, stack them all and put them in a single envelope. And now the message on the outside of the envelope became the political influence, right? Of like, here are 1,000 checks, each for the limit of $3,000, but here are 1,000 checks that all say, do this about abortion or don't do this about abortion. Now, at least there's some political motivation to that. And that was like one of the issues addressed in some of the most recent campaign finance policy. As a theoretical concept there, it's like, all right, now you are associating a message with these dollars, but there's still lacks any kind of recourse, right? So the amount of times that a political candidate has run on one subject and then done the exact opposite when they're in office, they collected all of that money with those people were like, this money is for doing this policy thing that I want my politician to do. But because there's no recourse, like there's no direct democracy, it's representative in that way, just giving it to the person that seems to almost further remove the message from the money. To your point, like the dollar doesn't speak for it.
Yeah, like the idea, like speech is supposed to be about ideas, not just volume. And that's what money does. Money just adds volume to what you want. You know what I mean? It's like, and so somebody gives you, more money. It's kind of like a billionaire can now have a dumbass idea, and they just spread that dumbass idea out everywhere. And now more and more people are exposed to a stupid ass idea when the whole point about freedom of speech is that anybody should be able to put out a good idea and have that be recognized by people and then like gain adherence from it. But it seems to be completely reversed. It's like first you get adherence and then who cares about what the message is? Yeah.
So I think that the exact opposite of that is also a good argument for it, saying that if money is speech, then those without money get no speech or get, less speech.
Yeah.
I think that argument, like the classism of democracy, then like it turns it into this like inherently oligarchy system where it's like, if you don't have this capital, which is now speech, like you don't get to participate in the arena the same way. Like it seems very glaring. Like that seems very obvious when you make statements like finance or like money is speech or like, donation is speech. So I think indicting those particular underpinnings of some of the policies or Supreme Court decisions and things is worth bringing up. This just kind of, I guess, comes back to my lack of knowledge of civics. What checkbacks exist on the Supreme Court? Like what checks and balances are there against the Supreme Court?
Just constitutional amendments. We have to amend the Constitution in order to override the Supreme Court, because that's what they rest everything on is what the Constitution says. But even then they can be like, yeah, well, you amended it this way, but we think that what you meant was, you know what I mean? It's like the way I read your amendment this way. And so
I acknowledge like it's a passive branch. So like the point being like, because they can't legislate, they get to, interpret and things, but that doesn't feel fully like a check, right? Like I understand like when the president can veto a bill, right? Or like Congress can override a veto. Like those are pretty direct checks, but it seems like just, and we get to decide what the rules mean seems to be once again overpowering. Linked to the time that we had conversations around Supreme Court reform. That was a fun topic as well. And heck, that's maybe, relevant once more.
Yeah. Like, that's interesting sort of like, I mean, that you'd be inviting a topicality debate, but if you say it's like, listen, we can't do any finance reform with the Supreme Court the way it is. So it's like a necessary precursor to do this. Like the only way we can get financial reform is by the term limits on the Supreme Court. You know what I mean? And so that'd be interesting. Another sort of term limits one, right? And so anytime if the topic was as vague as to say like term limits are good, period. You're like, okay, we can do FEC, we can do Supreme Court, and we can do, and like both of those could be talking about elections. Yeah.
I think that it's fun when topicality debates actually do incorporate real world. Like it's not just an a priori discussion, but you actually get to talk about like, well, here, fundamentally, this thing is impossible. Like it's an inherency question of like this, the way that this is phrased makes it already naturally not inherent. Therefore, there is no potential topical plan except for this. Like, I think those are fun answers to like an effects topicality or throwing that back. Like, nope, we're actually the only way to be topical.
Otherwise, like you're forcing us into like this weird hypothetical world
Yeah.
That's, into a useless argument. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, we got to. Okay. Well, campaign finance reform is a sticky issue, and it seems I don't know. One analogy I have is anyone who knows the game Magic: The Gathering. It's usually the people that know the rules the best that win, not necessarily who has the best cards. And that's what reminds me of this right now. It's kind of like, if you know the rules about campaign finance reform, because they are always getting updated with, year over year new Supreme Court decisions. The more you know about the rules, the better your chances are of winning a debate on it.
And if you'd like what we've said, donate to our super PAC.
Yeah.
We are DebateSensei for America.
Oh, man. Yeah. I remember when, I think it was Stephen Colbert started his own super PAC.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. No, I think it might have been John Oliver. No, he started a religion. Yeah. I think that was yeah. So, but yeah, it's so easy to start your own super PAC somewhat. We should do it.
But yeah, by the end of the show, donate to my super PAC. We'll do whatever we want with the money.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, good luck on any topic that you run into that happens to do with campaign finance reform. There is a lot to read up on it, as you can tell. Even if you don't want to go the policy route, maybe a bit more of a philosophical discussion would be great. All right. We are DebateSensei, Tim and Jared. We will be back in the future with more discussion about debate-related topics. Thank you.
Thanks.